Welcome to the Digging Deeper podcast. I'm Stacey Martin, and I'm glad you're here. We are kicking off a new season and a new series this December with Christmas here at Forest Hill, and I'm joined by my friend Lauren Burris. Lauren is the Family Ministry Director at our Fort Mill campus, and she's in seminary too in the process of ordination, so you're like a legit, you know exactly what you're talking about.
I wouldn't say that.
Well, you're going to bring expertise that I certainly don't have, so I'm
Maybe.
so glad you're here.
Thank you. Thanks for
This is
having
a really exciting season just because it's, we just came out of Thanksgiving last week. And there's something about this first week of December that for me always feels special. I think sometimes it brings an air of fatigue. You know, you come off Thanksgiving and you're like dog tired from the cooking and the cleaning. Actually, a girl this week was telling me that, you cook for 2 days and then you eat for 20 minutes. And it's like,
all that work.
all that work.
Right.
For what?
I know. Yeah.
Well, and I guess that's my question.
Yeah.
Thanksgiving and this idea of gratitude. We come off a holiday. It's a national holiday where people are focused on gratitude. And yet sometimes we focus on the food and the travel and the people and not really about this act of gratitude.
Right.
What role do you think gratitude plays in our spiritual lives?
Man, I think our spirituality starts with gratitude. I mean, it is our response to what God has done for us. And so if it wasn't for what Jesus did on the cross and him raising from the dead, I mean, our only response is out of gratitude. And I really feel like there's 3 parts to gratitude, and you find gratitude in the middle. And the first is forgiveness. Like, we've been forgiven. And so we can be thankful and we can show gratitude. And gratitude then moves us to love. And so there's this idea that forgiveness unlocks gratitude and gratitude unleashes love.
Ooh.
And so there's this flow of spirituality within that if we can understand how much we have been forgiven by God, then we should be grateful for what we've been given and what we have.
Well, so how do we use gratitude as a tool to grow spiritually? And I think you talked a little bit about that when it comes to forgiveness. But if you're somebody that's new to faith, maybe you're even struggling with the idea of what it means to be fully forgiven, then how do you use this tool of gratitude to grow spiritually?
Yeah, I think that, as Christians, sometimes it's easier for us to see what's wrong and to see the bad instead of looking for the good and seeing how God is working in us and amongst us and in the people that he's entrusted us with and the people that we have influence with. And so I think that as Christians, whether you're a new believer or a mature believer, we need to turn our attention to the good and to what God is doing right now. There's so many times I feel like even in the stories of the Old Testament where God is like, remember what I've done. The Israelites are always complaining about what they don't have, whether it's a good king or they don't have food or you've brought us out into the wilderness, et cetera, et cetera. And God is constantly, remember what I've done. Remember the good. Remember how I delivered you. Remember the good leaders I've given you. All of these things, he returns them to a place of gratitude so that they can actually see life in the way that it was meant to, a life that's full and abundant because that's what he's given us.
Well, a couple months ago, Robbie Fisher was one of my guests, and he was talking about one of his spiritual disciplines at the time was reading through the Psalms. And every day he would pray, he would use the Psalm as his guide of prayer.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's interesting. And so I go back into my own prayer journal, and everything is kind of like a complaint or a need. I have my list of people, I have my list of things, and it's all places where I feel like they're deficits. And then so I looked at Robbie's thing. I'm like, well, I'll start. And there are parts of the Psalms where King David is lamenting all that's happening, but a lot of it is prayers of thanksgiving.
Yeah.
And so for a long time, I spent months just switching my prayers of deficit to my prayers of abundance.
That's good.
And it's a crazy mind shift to look around and say, even like, look at my kids. I've got 2 very strong-willed, active, like knock the drywall right off your walls kids. And instead of praying for like, Lord, help Michael not lead a gang when he's a teenager,
Right.
But instead, like, God, thank you for this gift of this kid who is strong and funny and smart and passionate. It changes. It's a reframing.
Oh, absolutely. And my son is like the Grinch because he's so sensitive and like one little thing just throws him off and it'll ruin his whole day, just because we left the birthday party. The birthday party wasn't enough. It was the leaving the birthday party. Our consumption is over, right? And so it's this idea that, the party's over and now life is back to the way it was, which wasn't really great to begin with, you know,
My
and
life
so
is so boring
my life
absent
is
that birthday
so
party.
boring as a 6-year-old boy who everything is handed to you, right?
Yeah.
And so these acts of gratefulness, it's like, what were you grateful? What did you have fun with today? Why are you friends with Sammy or with Lucas? Like, what do you love about them? And so like trying to turn our minds towards what's good, so that it turns into gratefulness
Well, I think
is
a lot of people, I mean, Jonathan, your son
yeah,
included or excluded. I mean,
yeah,
we all go through these seasons where we feel like life is handed us lemons.
right.
You know, that nothing's ever
Yeah.
good enough. It's just too hard. I mean, sometimes it's real trials. It's
Mhm.
death, it's sickness. I mean,
Yeah.
really hard stuff.
Yeah.
Other times it's situational. It's just like the party's over and I
Right.
want to be mad about it.
Yeah.
How do you when you're in a season where things
Mhm.
are hard,
Yeah.
really hard,
Yeah.
how can we muster up gratitude?
Man, I think the first thing is that we need to fight bitterness.
Mm.
And bitterness is really just anger turned backwards. Like it's just anger turned towards ourselves,
Oh,
right? Which
yeah.
really stems from us not being able to forgive ourselves the way that God has forgiven us. So back to that whole forgiveness thing. But I think when life hands us lemons, we just have to be able to sit and see that God is still working amongst the mess and
Mhm.
in the destruction. I was reading in Micah over the weekend, and Micah prophesies about the destruction of Israel, but because it's bringing hope and it's bringing redemption and it's going to bring freedom to the Israelites and to God's people. And so there's this ebb and flow of destruction and lemons, if you will,
Mhm.
and then hope and light and freedom. And it's like you can't really even have one without the other here
Oh, yeah.
on life on this planet,
Yeah, it's
until heaven
the
comes.
two sides of one coin.
Right.
Well, it's interesting that we really wrapped up this season, Renew, the return to something
Hmm.
new, with this idea of gratitude because it does. I mean, we're looking at Isaiah's prophecy
Yeah.
of things being rebuilt and reborn and
Yeah.
renewed, and that's gratitude has
Good.
such a role in that.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have to be able to see what God is doing, the good, even amongst the unlearning or what looks like destruction in the midst. He's
Yeah.
rebuilding the cornerstones and rebuilding the church and rebuilding our character, rebuilding all these things within us. And it can be painful.
I think it even starts with just a very small prayer of like, God, help me see the situation differently. Help me
Absolutely.
see it with your eyes. Because I
Yes.
feel like when it comes through our lens,
Hmm.
it's so limited,
Right.
right? I mean,
Right.
our viewpoint is so myopic. It is so nearsighted. I mean, I can think about that in
Hmm.
my own life, and I have not had some very big, terrible trials. I mean, I've had
Hmm.
some friends that have gone through some very hard things. And I think of my friend Lynn Marie. She passed away from cancer last
Hmm.
year and stage 4 breast cancer and had young children and a great husband. And throughout her whole sickness, I mean, she was very sick. I mean,
Hmm.
it was ebbs and
Yeah.
flows, it was hills and valleys. But she always asked God to see it through his lens. And
Hmm.
her outlook and her ability to muster up gratitude and
Hmm.
joy in what
Hmm.
felt terminal, literally and figuratively,
Right.
was amazing to me. And
Yeah.
I thought, gosh, I want to be like that.
Yeah.
Like, I want to be like that in my day to day when the car breaks down and there's a load of
Mm-hmm.
laundry to do and
Mm-hmm.
somebody needs to eat again, you
Right.
know?
Right.
And I just want to
Yeah.
be like that.
I know. Hebrews 12, 1-2 talks about how Jesus is the author and perfecter of our faith and how we're to fix our eyes on him. And I think there's something about when we fix our eyes on God, when we turn outward, right? Not this egocentric, how do I feel? How does this make me feel? How are people misunderstanding or understanding me, etc. Like it's all so egocentric. When we fix our eyes on Jesus, all of a sudden things are a little more clear, right? We can act justly. We can love mercy. We can do all those
Walk
things,
humbly.
walk
Yeah.
humbly with God. And it just changes our attitude and our posture towards people and towards God, and towards this life that we've been given to live.
Well, what I have loved about this 2019 calendar, a lot of people are complaining that Thanksgiving was so late in the year.
Yeah.
But so Thanksgiving being the end of November and the very butting right up against the first weekend in December, which
Yeah.
starts Advent.
Yes.
So if you've not been part of a church community or kind of this Christian heritage thing, you probably
Right.
don't know what Advent is.
Right.
What is Advent?
So Advent is one of 2 seasons that the Christian community or the Christian church takes time to celebrate or focus on a certain event in history. So you have Advent and you have Lent. Lent leads to Easter, the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and Advent leads up to the joyous anticipation of Jesus coming to earth. And so Advent is this joyous, hopeful season that's to create light and kindness within our world.
Well, how can we develop a practice of Advent? I mean, I know
Yeah.
there are different things you can do. You hear about people with, the Advent calendars with the chocolates
Right.
inside, which my family is voting for.
Yeah,
They're like
right.
lighting candles,
Yeah,
whatever. Give us
yeah,
the flaps and the chocolate.
yeah.
But then there's the Advent candles where you've
Mhm.
got three purple, one pink, and one white one where you light them
Right,
in order. How can we develop a practice of Advent in our own families if
right.
we don't come from that
Yeah.
tradition?
I think it's adding whatever you can into the rhythms that you've already established within your home or within your family life. So it doesn't have to be some grandiose, all right, now, children, we're going to sit around the coffee table. We're going to pull out the candles. Don't touch the candle because
It's
it's
very
fire,
hot.
right? And we're going to have this beautiful reading of the scriptures, which your children are not going to understand, especially if they're under the age of 8, and it's like we have these grandiose ideas of what Advent can look like.
Especially, when a lot of the Christmas scriptures start with the genealogy of Christ,
Right.
like Yon Fest. I mean, as an adult, we can see,
Right.
gosh, Jesus comes from the root of Jesse, King David. But as a
Right.
kid, you're like, what is this strange list of old names?
Right. And
Yeah.
you can't even pronounce them, so your kids are just laughing at you. It's like, what is this
Yes.
story? Why is it important? But I think finding the rhythms, and so like for my family, we don't have necessarily a time that we sit down separate for Advent. We add it into our dinner time. And so we have an Advent calendar from True Cotton, and it has a verse or two, or maybe a whole chapter. And my husband will read the scripture, and sometimes one of my children will want to read it too. And then we ask questions about it around the table, and just to turn our attention towards what we're celebrating this month.
That's really
And
great.
so just using what you already have, I think, is a part of Advent and celebrating and creating rhythms within home.
Well, I love that because I think so many of us, whether you have kids or not, feel like it has to be some structured,
Right.
like sanctioned church event, church devotional, whatever.
Right.
And really, I know in my family, I've said it many times on here, my boys are wild.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're not going to sit down and do a family devotional.
Right.
I'd like to, and maybe someday, my
Mhm.
hopes are very low that we will have this special Hallmark moment where Candace Cameron Bure is reading,
Right.
the book of Luke. And it's very, very low
Yeah.
hanging fruit there. But
Yeah.
one of the things that we do is we have some set traditions that already happen.
Yeah. Right.
So the day after Thanksgiving, we get our Christmas tree.
Mm-hmm.
And we do this family time and we talk about, as we're looking at the ornaments and we're looking at the genealogy of our own family. Like this was Mumi's Christmas ornament.
Yeah.
We know that Jesus had a grandma too. Talking about that.
Yeah.
And then we go through and we do the first Sunday of every December. I go to a Moravian Love Feast at this
Mhm.
little church in downtown Waxhaw. And it is from my heritage. It's
Mhm.
something I grew up doing, but I've brought my boys along.
Yeah.
And it's lighting the candles, it's reading the scripture, singing the
Yeah.
Christmas carols, doing this agape meal,
Right.
this almost like communion, really,
Right.
among a community of believers. And it's been really special to see them start to develop a rhythm of Christmas.
Right. Yeah. I think that if we can be intentional about all the symbols that come along with the Advent and the Christmas season. So even like the Christmas tree, an evergreen, like why the Christmas tree? Why the evergreen? Well, evergreens stay green for always, right? And so there's this idea that hope is forever, that the light of the world is forever. And so that's why we put up Christmas trees in our home. And so we talk about the meanings of some of these, which could just seem like easy traditions. There's actually meaningful thought and theology behind some of these things. And so when we have rhythms already established in the home, especially for children and teenagers, you've created safety and trust. And so if you just add a little more intentionality during Christmas season or during Advent to those times, they're going to trust you and hear you, and it's going to feel a little easier instead of trying to create something new.
So for teenagers, it's a little bit harder. And your
Sure.
experience was with youth ministry for a long
Yes.
time.
Yeah.
You love teenagers. Teenagers love you. I mean, they are
Yeah.
your people.
Yeah.
You have created incredible relationships with a lot of teenagers over the years, really made a
I
difference.
love them. Yeah.
But teenagers come from a different place.
Sure.
They're aging out of some Christmas traditions.
Yep.
They are seeking independence. They're already thinking about kind of what their new adult lives can look like. What is it,
Mhm.
if you are a parent of teenagers or you have a teenager in your life that you
Right.
really care about?
Yeah.
What is it, or maybe you don't really care about them that much and you want to,
Yeah.
teenagers can be tough.
Yeah.
But you want to get this teenager to develop a rhythm of anticipating Christ
Yeah.
and Christmas.
Mhm.
What do you think that looks like?
I think there's two things. I think first you have to affirm their journey and who they are. And I think at Christmas time is a great place to do that, to remind them, just like God reminded the Israelites, of who they are, who you know them to be, and what role they play in your family. So if they're an older sibling, how can they make Christmas magical and special for younger siblings? Or how could they serve grandma this season? Kind of affirming their own journey and their own role within the family unit, maybe within their neighborhood, within their friend group, at their church if they're serving. And so I think there's ways to affirm them in their identity of who they are during Christmas season. And then the second thing is to mobilize them in their passions. I think a part of even gratitude is understanding what gifts we have been given. And if we don't use the gifts that God has given to us, it's an ungrateful heart.
Oh, that's good.
And so we need to steward the gifts and the passions of our teenagers. So how can you mobilize them this Christmas? Do they have musical talents? So do they take their guitar to JCPenney and sing Christmas carols? Or do they sign up for an open mic night and spread Christmas cheer for all to hear? What are some of those things that you can actually mobilize them in their passions this Christmas season around the idea that Christ has come to be with us, Emmanuel, God is with us.
Well, I know that question was about teenagers, but I can't help but think about the adults in our lives too.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, gosh, to affirm somebody in their journey. I mean, I think it's one thing about the gifts, about unleashing, helping people unleash their gifts that God has given them.
Right.
But the idea that we would validate somebody else's faith journey or who God has made them to be or where they are in the process could unlock a whole different perspective on Christmas.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Because, it comes across as a commercial holiday. You've got, if you can't sit back and reflect on what Jesus has done for you or what journey God has you on, it really is just another day on the calendar.
Right.
But to look at it through fresh eyes, that's really interesting.
Yeah, we have to be able to articulate our own story within the grander story. Neuroscience tells us that if we articulate what we know to be real, it connects the left brain to the right brain and actually becomes belief. So how are we teaching our teenagers, even our adults, our children, how to articulate and to storytell our own narration of what we believe about God, about our families, about ourselves? It's so important to our human development to be able to do that. And so I think a part of affirming the journey is having teenagers articulate, what do you believe? What are you feeling? How does this enter into a grander story, but to find ourselves in the story and be able to storytell ourselves creates meaningful history and not just these traditions that can come and go with seasons.
Well, as much as Advent is looking forward and anticipation, I do believe, like you were talking about earlier, that so much of it is connected to this sacred art of remembering. Is remembering what God has done, but also the challenges or the trials or what's been hard.
Yeah.
What have you learned from 2019?
Such a loaded question.
I know. I put it in there and I thought, God, I'm glad I'm not answering that one.
2019. You look back and say, what happened?
What was? But, I think that's what's so interesting about Advent happening at the end of the year.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, Mike Bowler was my guest last week, and we talked about how some people in the new year, they feel like the Lord gives them a word.
Yeah.
I've only ever had that happen once.
Yeah.
And it was really cool.
It's never happened to me.
I don't know if it's going to happen this year. He may be like, yeah, I gave you one last year.
Yeah.
But there's something about looking backwards and looking forwards that really helps you understand what God may be doing on a macro level.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what do you think you've learned from 2019?
Man, I think if I had to narrow it down, there's probably two things. My husband and I were having a conversation a few weeks ago, and maybe more of an argument than a conversation. And I looked at him, I'm like, I don't need you, right? Let's be honest. I'm a type 8 on the Enneagram. I'm direct, I'm honest, I'm concise. And so I'm like, I don't need you. And he looked at me and he's like, you do need me because I need you. And he was like arguing my own words to me. He's like, we were created to need each other. That's why God gave Eve to Adam. It was not good for Adam to be alone. We need each other. And I think that I grew up being individualistic. I can do everything on my own. Yeah, I can carry my own suitcase. I can open my own door. I can do anything that you can do. I had this confidence about me as a woman. I'm like, I don't need anybody, right? I'm like, I know you might need me, but I don't need you, this whole pride thing. I think what this year has taught me through the loss of friendship and even in the gift of friendship as well, that I need people. More than I've realized that I needed that. And so there's a humility that has come with that God's like, I've given you good people, steward them well, but also enjoy them as a gift.
Gosh, imagine what that's going to open up for 2020.
Yeah.
Because I think that is what you have just described, I imagine that a lot of people have felt that
Yeah.
because I think every year brings the loss and
Mm,
gain of relationships.
right.
It's like a plus and minus situation.
Yeah.
And I think for most of us, and I think this is just the way society and culture is, we've created this society that says, I've got this. I can do it on my
Right.
own. I've been reading Present Over Perfect by Shauna Nequist, and she
Mhm.
talks about just like being on the drug of efficiency,
Yeah.
of like being capable. One of the worst slams anybody could ever say to me is that like, oh, Stacey Martin, she's just not capable. Like she
Mm.
just
Right.
like don't give it to her, she'll never
Yeah.
get it done.
Yeah.
She's incapable, and that would just crush me.
Yeah.
Like I want to be seen as capable and efficient and
Right.
a get it done girl, like your girl
Mhm.
for the job.
Right.
And while that's great, it creates this you end up on an island.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know? So
Oh,
gosh,
yeah.
imagine what 2020 is gonna look like not being on an island by yourself.
I know. Yeah. I can't wait. And it's also like frightening too. It's like, oh, wait, I do need something and I do need people, which means that's going to be messy. And so require time, the whole efficiency thing. I'm going to just stop what I'm doing, like all of these things. And so there's a fear there, but also a great growth as well.
Well,
So,
what do you think this idea about relationships, what do you think it's gonna teach you during this Christmas season of Advent?
you know, um, coming back to like Hebrews 12 in verse 2 there, it says that for the joy set before him, Christ endured the cross. And there's this idea of joy that comes with Christmas this year, that for the joy, I can endure a little longer. You can endure
Mhm.
the sadness, you can endure the mess a little longer. Um, so when I think about what Jesus endured, I mean, it just kind of puts things in perspective. He endured leaving heaven to walk this dirty earth. He endured human parents. He endured 39 lashes. He endured a crown of thorns being put on his head. He endured, and for joy, he says this, for joy. He endured walking 2.5 miles with an 80-pound cross on his back up a hill.
After he'd been beaten.
Right.
Yeah.
And so on, and the story goes. And it's just like for joy, we endure. And for joy, we love. And for joy, we're going to be grateful. And so I think that's the season. There's a lot of joy in the glitter of the Christmas tree and the lights. There's a lot of joy in friendship and around meals with people. And every moment just feels like it's for the joy. So,
Well, one of the ways I like to close out the podcast each week is
Mhm.
have my guests pray for our listeners.
mm,
We've got an incredible community of listeners that are widespread all over North Carolina, some in Minnesota. We've got people
yeah,
everywhere. And I think people come to this podcast with a lot of different things going on.
absolutely.
Some people are coming in like, yeah, I get it. I've always
Yeah.
done Advent. I love Christmas. I love Jesus. I'm here for it.
Mhm.
Other people are like, this is hard.
Yeah.
Christmas is hard.
Yeah.
Family's hard. I'm not sure I'm seeing how God's moving.
Mhm.
I want to believe that He is, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure this enduring and joy algorithm thing is paying
Yeah.
off for me.
Mm.
So, would you mind closing this prayer and praying specifically for the
Sure.
people who are looking for the joy in
Yeah.
this season?
to.
Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah. God, you are the author and the perfecter of our faith, and you are the joy giver, and you are Emmanuel. You are God with us. Lord, so I pray for my friends who are listening now that you would meet them where they are. God, I pray that you would sustain them in their endurance, that you would sustain them in joy, that you would sustain them in gratitude. God, I pray that when they wake in the morning, the first words out of their mouth would be thank you, or I rejoice because God has been good to me. God, so I pray for eyes to see the good. Pray for hearts that feel thanksgiving and gratitude. God, I pray for my friends who are confused, that you would replace their confusion with wisdom and clarity. I pray for those who are afraid, that you would replace their fear with your perfect love. God, and I pray for those who feel anxiety driven, that you would replace their anxiety and their worry with your peace that surpasses all understanding. God, so I pray that you would help us fix our eyes on you as we joyfully anticipate the coming of Christ, and that we get to celebrate that here in the coming weeks. God, so I pray that for the joy, we would endure this season, God, and that we would look to you for our hope in our life. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
And thanks so much. If you're looking for an Advent devotional to follow along, Forest Hill has a great one online. If you go to foresthill.org/resources, you'll be able to find our full Advent devotional there. It's really exciting. I got to write one for December 20th, so I'm excited to
Awesome.
see what that looks
Okay.
like. And If you're looking for any other resources, foresthill.org is a great place. I'm excited that you joined us this week. Next week, we're going to be in our second week of this series, of this actually new series called God Comes Near. And we're really excited that you're here, and we hope that you join us. Have a great one.